Hi everyone, and welcome to this video tutorial about QCing notch blocks and outputting them to the big screen. We will also talk a little bit about color management before going over exporting to Notch LC in the next video. Let's start by creating a new project. Define the name of the project and the default resolution and frame rate for new timelines. Note that these are really only defaults. You can change any setting of anything, including existing timelines, once inside the project. Also, to make things a bit more straightforward, let's make sure color management is disabled over here. Hit OK to get back to the logon screen. Before we enter our new project, let's first check a couple of settings. First is the Video I/O settings menu. In the list up here, you will see all devices that Scratch could find. This can also be virtual devices like the NDI device or an output plugin for Nope Omniscope. Hardware-wise, we support all devices from AJA and Blackmagic. Let me select my decklink card so I can configure it in terms of resolution, frame rate, color model, levels, and much more. Scratch lets us output in resolutions up to 8K. Also make sure to have at least one output channel enabled down here. Okay, next let's check into the system settings and the panel setup tab in here. I'm going to enable the tangent element panel. Actually, I only have the MF panel connected for pure transport purposes. I have mapped it to drive the virtual camera inside the notch blocks, more on that in just a bit. Also, since we're doing QC, we can define a number of default color nodes here to apply to our shot in question, using hotkeys Shift plus F1 through F8. Hit OK to close the settings and enter into the project. Here on the left we can see a list of timelines, currently only one, and down here we can see the resolution and frame rate of the current selected timeline. Let's import a couple of notch blocks into this timeline. I can either select them individually using Ctrl or Shift click, or I can enable the Select Folder option here and select the folder containing all blocks. Importing can take a while depending on the complexity of the notch blocks. Once they are loaded, simply drop them into the timeline. They all come in with their respective length. If you want to change the length of any clip, you can do so easily in the Edit tab. Most of our QC, however, will take place in the Color Effects tab. Before we start our QC, let's make sure our color management for monitoring is set up correctly. In the Media menu, we can tell Scratch what color space and EOTF the underlying clip has. Just tagging the clip with a color space and EOTF as such does not change any pixels. It merely informs Scratch on the specifics of the underlying clip. Let's set this clip to Rec. 709 with a gamma of 2.4. Next, we need to tell Scratch what color space and EOTF the displays attached to it expect their content to be in. For this, we go to Settings, Monitors. In here we have a list of all displays, or outputs so to speak. Our interface monitor, for instance, should be set to Rec. 709 gamma 2.4, as that's what it's calibrated for. Now we do not see the image change because right now, clip and display are set to the same color space and EOTF. However, I do have a reference monitor set to P3D65 and PQ HDR attached to my decklink card via SDI. So let me set my decklink output to that, and Scratch will convert the Rec. 709 flagged clip to P3D65PQ just for this output, so it looks correct on my HDR reference monitor. To start our QC, we need a couple more tools at our disposal. Let's go back to the Color Effects tab and enable the scopes from the top menu bar. The scopes also feature a number of settings, most importantly this drop-down, which lets us set the source which the scopes should look at. I'll leave it to source, so we're always looking at what's actually inside the clip. Next, I'll bring up the annotation tool, so I can quickly scribble any remarks I have about this scene. Also, on the right side, I'll switch to the metadata stack, which allows me to apply custom color nodes at any given timecode. Of course, I can also apply any of the predefined color nodes via the hotkeys. To navigate through the scene, I have mapped my panel to control the Scratch internal virtual camera. Here in the settings I can open up the mappings dialog. I created two mapping groups which I can switch with the jog shuttle buttons on the panel. My tracker ball and ring will then control either camera XYZ position or its rotation, depending on which mapping group I select. With this mapping, I am controlling the parameters inside the camera menu, but not the camera parameters of the notch block itself. So what we have to do now is to enable the Use Shot Camera button here and basically let the Scratch internal camera drive the notch block camera. Don't forget to activate the camera here in the camera menu and enable Auto Key. Doing so will obviously create an animation throughout the shot whenever we move our camera. However, this will also ensure that our camera looks at the right thing when we make a note or mark something up in the scene when going over it later on or exporting a report. Now let's do some QC, shall we? The scopes will always tell us whether we're clipping anything in luminance or gamut. Let's start on the first frame and check out the floor of this scene. I think it could be a little bit brighter and less red. So let's mark this up real quick and add a note. Let's scrub forward a few frames so Scratch can create a new keyframe for the camera and take a look at the lights here. They look great, but I'd like the notch artist to also expose control over the brightness and hue of these lights so I can control them from inside Scratch. Again, mark up, and let's add a quick note. Scrub forward to create a new keyframe for our camera, and let's check out the background behind the windows here. We would like to have a desert background rather than the city skyline behind the TV screens. Mark up and set the note. As long as you're in annotation mode, indicated by the pen icon here in the viewport, the navigation is also set to annotation. In this mode, I can use Ctrl plus left-right arrow on my keyboard to jump to the next note in the timeline and quickly go through all annotations I made. This will greatly help later on when comparing notes against an updated version of the notch block with the changes implemented. It also lets us check whether all keyframes for the camera have been set correctly so it matches with our markup overlay. Okay, enough for a quick QC session. What we now need to do is communicate these changes to the notch artist or the company providing the notch block. For this, Scratch features a very comprehensive report generator. However, before we export a report, let's make sure our project metadata is filled out correctly. For this, we go back to the Construct tab and in the upper left corner switch to the Properties tab. In here, we can fill out generic fields if we want to. This info shows up on the header of our report. Let's quickly fill out company and director, just so we have something here. Now for the report. In the Tools menu, click the corresponding button and select the Clip Review report type. This will pull a snapshot of any frame that has a markup or a note on it. This will obviously only work correctly if we had Auto Key enabled when moving the camera around during our QC. Next, we can set the scope of this report. In our case, timeline is fine, but we could also tell Scratch to export the report for just a selection of clips, or entire groups, or the whole project. We can set a company logo for the report here if we want to. The poster frame parameter is not relevant with a review report, as Scratch will export all frames that have a markup on them. With other report types, this lets us select from where in the clip, beginning, end, or somewhere in the middle, it should pull the poster frame for the report. So let's hit OK and select the file type we want to export the report in. We can choose HTML, which will still let us edit the report in a browser, or go straight to PDF. Right after the export, the report will open up for us to quickly check. Looks good. We can now send this PDF to the client or notch artist. Once we receive an updated version of the notch block back, we can load it into the same timeline as a version and directly compare it to the original version, just like we saw in the previous video, using hotkeys D and S for dual and split view. That's it for this video. In the next part, we'll talk about Notch LC mastering. We'll show you how to create Notch LC master files in different color spaces and resolutions for different deliveries of a single project. See you there.